All right, so we're going to focus on lacrosse ball myofascial release, the bottom of the feet. So, a couple things, little background info is we're just going to focus on the feet, but a lot of times this stuff comes up, into the calves and shins. Maybe I'll do that in another video. But we're going to focus on superficial tissue first. We'll do a little bit of rolling, but then we'll invite sinking. And this is where it's not rolling. We're utilizing the pressure, breath, and time to give the tissues permission to soften. It's kind of different than just kind of rolling back and forth. Anatomical points kind of have your heel bone here, and you got your toe ball mound here, your pinky toe ball mound here, and then obviously your toes. And so we're going to envision 3 tracks. The heel going up the outside of the foot, almost kind of making like a little W, and then the middle of the foot, and then the inside arch of the foot. Even though we might have certain areas that are more bothersome, we want to be sure to kind of hit the whole foot, because the whole foot works together, and there's, think of saran wrap around all the tissues, so even if like right here is probably really tender or whatnot, you still want to kind of get this area here when we're going for whole connective tissue releasing. Sometimes I will just put a ball here and just kind of do some stuff in one little spot, but when I'm trying to do a whole foot routine, I'll focus on the whole thing to really invite the full connective tissue to soften, which is kind of what we're going to do here. So we're going to start in seated, and then we're going to do it in standing. Starting in seated is good if you haven't really done a lot of this type of work before, because the fascia can be very sensitive, and on a standing pressure it can be a lot. If you've done ball releasing work on your feet, then you don't necessarily have to worry about the seated. You can probably just fast forward to the standing part. But we're going to start with just having the ball down, having our heel. And we really want to focus on the breath being a part of this practice. And again, we're starting superficial, so we can invite a little bit of the rolling. I almost hesitate showing this because I don't want you to think this is what we're going to do the rest of it. We're just kind of skimming the surface, just kind of getting the tissues comfortable with contact, with sensation. So kind of think of it as you're just kind of trying to touch everywhere on the bottom of the foot with the ball. We're not necessarily going deep or hard. We're not really trying to find any spots to dig in. We're just coming in contact with all the tissues, kind of getting them prepared to be receptive. You want to make sure you kind of get everywhere, sides of the foot, even up into the toes, rolling back and forth across the toes a little bit. And again, this feels good too. I think this is where a lot of people stop when it comes to the ball work on the feet. But this is just skimming the surface. All right, so do that as long as it feels good for you. We're going to focus on, again, starting at the heel. And now this is where we want to start to invite a little bit of pressure. You can start with the foot relaxed. Honestly, I like to add a little overpressure with my, body weight. But again, this is where you kind of determine what's appropriate. Depending on the position of your foot, below your knee or thigh might change the degree of pressure. We're just given a couple seconds, 10 to 30 seconds in an area to really kind of let the breath and the connective tissue kind of soften, to open up. And we'll invite that pressure to roll forward. Again, I'm focusing on kind of like the outside of the foot. And even when I was right there, I was noticing that my foot was attempting to clamp and contract. And so we want to notice when we're doing that. That's the equivalent of like holding our breath. And we don't really want that. We want to allow the body to be receptive. So this is where it's a paying attention. We're listening to the experience in the tissues, I'm already kind of noticing sensations shooting out into my toes and whatnot. We're just hanging out and breathing. Again, after about 20, 30 seconds, we can kind of bring it forward a little bit more. Again, kind of hanging out on that outside border of that foot. I'm pretty much right about there, and my track is going to be, along the outside of that foot. But we're just, letting pressure and time do its thing. Now it does kind of help a little bit to add some active participation. I find on the outside of the foot, a little bit of activation is beneficial, but really we're just getting started. We're just allowing the tissues to become receptive. So I've rolled the ball a little bit more. I hate even using the word roll, because we are slowly, more like steamrolling, soft steamrolling. You can think about, that we're keeping that pressure, and then we're inviting that pressure to, almost like we're trying to get bubbles out of if you ever had a sticker on a window or something, or done tint work, you're trying to think of it, you're keeping the pressure and then sliding along. That's what we're doing on the bottom of the foot. That we're letting pressure and time kind of do the work. And obviously you have to adjust. You might have to shift your foot a little bit. You can come off it, if you need to shift how your position and whatnot. Obviously, as we're moving, things change. But we want to kind of come back to that same spot and allow that pressure and time to do its thing. I've slowly made my way up to the pinky toe ball mound. Again, if it feels all right to add a little, squeeze and release, or trying to lift the toes up, a little bit of that is good. Keeping the breath flowing is the most important. We'll notice first that we'll start to hold our breath, and then we'll start to notice the tissues start to clench. It's very subtle, it's very soft. And I always like to get into the toes as well, up at the end. That's why I prefer the lacrosse balls, because you're able to get that final stretch of the toes, creating space from the foot without the ball shooting out. So that was the outside track. Now on the middle and the inside track, we're going to want to start to invite a little bit more of that active participation. So we're again starting on the heel. And you want to be on the heel bone itself. The bony prominences are where I think of them as connection points. They're points where tendons, tissues overlap to go in different directions or to create a pulley. So you really want to kind of get that tissue. That's where a lot of ish hangs out, and a lot of times we kind of avoid the bony prominences, particularly in traditional massage practices. Again, consider we've already been here, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, something like that. It doesn't be long, but you just want to give a little bit of time. And then we kind of come off of that shelf of that heel bone. And now we're kind of right in that common tendon, of those tissues in the bottom of the feet that wrap up into the calf. And so here we might start inviting, it's called dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. If you might start inviting squeezing the feet. Think of scrunching your feet. You're really trying to invite the feet to come together here. The front of the foot and the heel coming together and releasing. A little bit of the toes gets involved as well too, but we're just thinking of contracting the bottom of the feet and releasing. And after about 20-30 seconds, you might kind of roll that forward a little bit. Again, inviting the squeeze and releasing. From here on out is usually where most people start to feel really interesting sensations, we'll say. So another thing that's important to remember is letting yourself notice when you see things shooting to different areas, noticing temperature change, twitching, fluttering, any sort of sensational response to the body. It's not sharpshooting pain. Obviously, we're not trying to hurt ourselves. And we want to pay attention to what the body's telling you, because a lot of times it'll give you some insight, if you listen. So now I'm moving through full range on the bottom of the foot. Well, full range, but moving through, kind of squeezing, contracting the tissues at the bottom of the feet, and softening and lengthening. And we're moving through that range, and we want to invite that contraction to squeeze the tissues at the bottom of the feet, and then softening, and then lengthening. And each time we go through that middle part is where our tissues are at the softest, and you want to really allow that ball to sink in as you move from end range to end range. Thinking of it kind of like a swing of tension, and when you're going through the middle is when the ball has the deepest ability to sink in. And then when you're end range to end range, you're highlighting those tissues in which that receptivity can be better. So, about at this point, we start kind of noticing heat, burning, mild uncomfortable, and everybody's different. I've done this quite a bit, so I can notice that it's sensational, but it's not. I start noticing temperature change in my feet, weirdly enough. This is that flushing. This is circulation energy flushing to areas that have otherwise been contracted, constricted. And so again, that squeeze and release is our main motive, as long as we're keeping our breath flowing. Squeezing, releasing. Sometimes you'll find a spot where it's kind of like an interesting sensation where you're like, oh, that's well, I want to say a little much, but it's not too bad. You want to kind of hang out there for a minute. Like when I extend my foot and toes back, I can feel the ball pressing against a little bit of rigidity. But then as I kind of hang out and breathe, it softens just a little bit. And that's what we're going for. We're not trying to force. We're not trying to mash anything or make anything break. We're inviting a soft releasing of the bottom of the feet. Working that ball closer to the toe ball mounds. Squeezing, releasing. And we're not in a hurry. This is a somatic practice. This is a giving time for the tissues to soften practice. The mind is going to say, hurry up, I have things to do. I have to go, go, go. That's part of the reason why the tissues have the degree of tension they do. Because our body is trying to keep up with the pace of our mind. So invite the time to connect with the tissues as they are. Notice how they shift and change and respond as you do that. Kind of rolled the ball a little bit more. I'm closer to the toe ball mounds. Still not quite on them, but just behind them. Squeezing and releasing, inviting that softening midpoint. Keeping the breath flowing. And don't be afraid to kind of play around a little bit here, It might be beneficial to weight shift the ball just slightly, not move it, but maybe the angle of your foot just a little bit in, just a little bit out, a little bit forward, a little bit back. Each one of those tiny little angles kind of changes the trajectory of pressure into the tissues, and you affect different force lines. And again, we're focusing on the connective tissue, the muscular connective tissue as a whole. So every tiny little shift in force or direction in which you're pulling or contracting or stretching changes the tissues that get affected. So now we are on the toe ball mounds. Again, squeezing and releasing, whatever feels called for. And then again, ending with the toes themselves. And even when they're stretched, when they're pulled back, they're kind of pulled back like that, I'm still squeezing and releasing. I'm still inviting that contract, relax, that contract, relax, that invites the lengthening of the tissues. Again, for whatever time feels called for, play around with it. Now we're going to move on to the inner arch. And this one's usually kind of the most spicy. So again, starting on the heel bone, falling off of that heel bone shelf right there. Now, we're not only squeezing and releasing here, but you got to think about that there is what's called an abductor, which is kind of like your thumb has an abductor, brings your thumb out sideways. You have that in your foot as well, and it's a major arch support. So we're not just squeezing the bottom of the foot, but we're also inviting the toe to come out to the side. And we're playing around with that positioning. So we're doing the squeezing and releasing, but we're also inviting the toe to move. Maybe the big toe just gets its own movement for a little bit. A lot of our ish comes from that. Usually one foot's different than the other. Whatever foot we pivot on more tends to have a little bit more ish. Again, squeezing and releasing. See, right now I'm getting little tingles going down into the tips of my toes right now. So to me, that's a sign that I'm on an area that needs a little bit of time to hang out. So I'm going to breathe. I'm going to keep inviting my squeezing and releasing, focusing on that midpoint, inviting that softening. And it's almost the midpoint is what I'm curiously paying attention for as I'm doing this. I'm paying attention for that point where the tissues attempt to resist the releasing, and then where they find it. And it feels like that area is about where it's going to be. So I've slowly rolled the ball forward, keeping that mild steamrolling effect. See, for me, this area is where I'm really getting a lot of spiciness. So I'm feeling, temperature going towards my pinky toe, up my shin, towards the tips of my toes. So I'm going to hang out here. Inviting the toe to the side. There is another bit of the routine where you actually go up the arch along these ridges to kind of get deeper in that. We'll save that for another time. It's kind of a little bit more advanced of a ball rolling practice. Right now we're just focusing on the bottom of the feet. And find those spots where you feel almost that Indian burn feeling, that feeling where tissues are getting stretched when I'm moving through squeezing, softening, stretching. It's okay to follow that rigidity. And again, don't try to break it. Try to meet the tissues at that edge, where you stretch and it's definitely pressing into the ball, but it's not clenchy, it's not grimacy. Hang out and breathe. Notice if there's anywhere else that you're holding tension. Invite some softening around the knee, the shins and calf, the rest of the foot. Notice how that gives permission for that area to soften as well. And usually the first time you're ball rolling, doing the ball releasing, it's the most challenging. So again, you might not go as deep your first time of inviting this practice. You might go a little softer and see how your body responds to it. Now we're at the toe ball mound. Again, we're at that bony spot. Don't skimp on the bony spot. These bony landmarks are, again, where tissues wrap around. They are pulleys. They are juncture points. So they're worth giving some time. Again, biting the toe sideways, as well as, scrunching up and down. Now the big toe does need some separate love and attention here. Going nice and slow off of the ball mound, right onto that space between the toe ball mound and the toe. There's some schools of thought that discuss how this area is very much connected to neck and shoulder problems, issues. So don't be surprised if you might notice some tingling, twitching elsewhere. A lot of times I find it more common when we're doing the standing version, but don't be surprised if it happens in the sitting version. And so again, we're slowly inviting that connective tissue, around the bottom of that toe, the area where the toe meets the foot. We're breathing, we're squeezing, and we're lengthening. Making our way all the way to the bottom of the toe. Here I'm lifting the heel, but it's just to kind of get a greater lengthening the bottom of the toe. See how that kind of deepens the angle a little bit, so we're really giving permission for that toe to, fully lengthen whatever tissues. And maybe play around with a little bit more. I always like trying to get my toes in between the ball. I like to spread my toes a little bit. This is just kind of like, so I wear sandals a lot, so I like doing something that what's called abducting the toes to create a little space in the tissues here. So again, I'm using that ball to just lengthen just create space in the tissue. It just feels good. At this point, we're just kind of playing around with it. You can play around with any other stuff. If there's an area you want to go back to and bite a little bit more. But then when you're done, stand up, kind of walk around, and just kind of see how one leg feels compared to the other. This one not only feels more circulatory, but it also feels softer. This one feels like it's cold and heavy. And we can see the temperature change, color change. This one's red and flush, and this one's pale and white. So we've gotten a lot of circulation flowing into the feet, which that's one of the biggest challenges with feet, is because they're spend so much time holding our body weight up all day. They get contracted, constricted, blood flow gets reduced, they get scrunched and bunched, and it helps them continue to perform as we grind through our days, but they're not getting nurtured and supported. So the blood flow down into the feet is phenomenal. I'm going to do this one as well too, and I encourage, even if you have issues in one foot or the other, do both. Particularly the first few times doing it, you really want to give permission for both to release. After a while, there might be times where you do more specific one side or the other, but early on when you're first inviting it, do both. Again, breath, contract, relax, stretch, relax, softening. These are the principles to keep in mind. So I'm going to stop this video, and I'll do another one for standing at some point. But it's pretty much the same principle. You're just standing, and it's a lot more intense because you have your body weight, but we still want to maintain that softness. So if you feel inclined to explore the standing one, go ahead. Principles are the same, movements are the same, but with our body weight, it becomes a little bit more spicy. Anyways, good luck releasing.